Once upon a time, in a quiet farm, a mother duck sat on her nest, waiting for her eggs to hatch. After some time, the eggs began to crack, and out came several fluffy yellow ducklings. But one egg, the biggest of them all, took longer to hatch. When it finally cracked open, a large, gray, and awkward duckling appeared. The other ducklings looked at him in surprise because he didn't look like them at all. The mother duck loved all her children, but the other animals on the farm began to laugh at the new, gray duckling. "Look at him! He's so big and ugly," they said. The poor duckling felt sad and confused. He didn't understand why he looked different from his brothers and sisters. As days passed, the other ducklings would not play with him, and the animals on the farm kept teasing him. The ugly duckling felt very lonely. One day, the ugly duckling decided to leave the farm. He thought that maybe, somewhere else, he could find a place where he belonged. As he wandered through the countryside, he came across other animals, but none of them wanted to be his friend. Everywhere he went, he was met with laughter and rejection. The poor duckling felt more and more sad as the days passed, and he wondered if he would ever find a home. Autumn came, and the weather grew colder. The ugly duckling found a small pond to live in, but he was still alone. One day, as he looked up at the sky, he saw a flock of beautiful white birds flying in formation. They were graceful and strong, and the ugly duckling felt a deep longing to be like them. He admired their beauty but thought, "I could never be as beautiful as they are. I'm just an ugly duckling." Winter arrived, and the pond froze over. The ugly duckling had to struggle to survive. He shivered in the cold and hid from the harsh winds. One day, a kind farmer found him and took him to his warm home. The farmer and his family cared for the ugly duckling, giving him food and shelter. Although the duckling felt safe, he still longed to find where he truly belonged. Winter seemed so long and lonely for him. Finally, spring returned, and the sun began to shine again. The ugly duckling felt stronger and decided to leave the farmer's house. He found a large lake where he could swim freely. As he swam, he saw his reflection in the water and was shocked by what he saw. He had grown into a beautiful swan. The other swans on the lake swam up to him and welcomed him warmly. He wasn't an ugly duckling after all, he was a swan. The ugly duckling could hardly believe it. He had spent so much time feeling sad and alone, thinking he was ugly and didn't belong anywhere. But now, he had found a place where he was accepted and admired. The other swans told him how beautiful and graceful he was, and for the first time, he felt truly happy. He realized that he had been beautiful all along, he just didn't know it yet. As he swam with the other swans, the ugly duckling, now a proud swan, thought back to his time on the farm. He remembered how lonely and sad he had felt when the other animals teased him. But now, he understood that being different wasn't a bad thing. It just meant that he was special in his own way. He smiled, feeling proud of who he had become and thankful for the journey that led him here. One day, as the swan was swimming on the lake, some children came to watch. They pointed at him with excitement and shouted, "Look at the beautiful swan." The swan felt proud and happy. The children admired his long neck and shiny white feathers. It was a wonderful feeling for the swan, who had spent so much time thinking he was ugly. Now, he knew that he was just as beautiful as any other swan. The swan enjoyed his life on the lake, surrounded by other swans and beautiful nature. He no longer felt lonely or sad. He had learned an important lesson: beauty is not always on the outside, and sometimes it takes time to discover who you really are. The swan was grateful for his journey, even though it had been hard at times. He knew that without those challenges, he would never have discovered his true self. As the seasons changed, the swan continued to live happily on the lake. He had found his place in the world and was surrounded by others who accepted him for who he was. He often thought about the other animals on the farm who had teased him, but he didn't feel angry anymore. Instead, he hoped that they would one day learn to accept others, no matter how different they seemed. The swan had found peace in his heart. The swan's life was full of joy now. He had many friends and a beautiful home on the lake. He would glide across the water gracefully, feeling the warm sun on his feathers. Every day, he was reminded of how far he had come and how much he had grown. The other swans admired his strength and kindness, and he was loved and respected by all. The ugly duckling had truly transformed, both inside and out. One day, the swan saw a group of ducklings swimming near the edge of the lake. They reminded him of his own childhood. He swam over to them and smiled. The ducklings looked up at the large, beautiful swan with admiration. "You are so graceful," one of them said. The swan smiled and replied, "Thank you. But remember, no matter what others say, always believe in yourself. You are all special, just as you are." The ducklings listened to the swan's words carefully. They were young, but they understood the message. It wasn't about what others thought of them, it was about how they saw themselves. The swan had learned this lesson through his own difficult experiences, and he wanted to share it with others. As the duckling swam away, the swan felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had passed on some wisdom to the next generation. Time passed, and the swan continued to enjoy his life on the lake. He often thought about the journey he had been through, from feeling like an outcast to finding his true identity. He knew that not everyone would have the same journey, but he hoped that others would learn from his story. He had learned to be proud of who he was and to never give up, even when things seemed difficult. The swan's days were filled with happiness, surrounded by other swans who loved and respected him. He had found a place where he belonged, and he knew that this was what he had been searching for all along. The ugly duckling had become a beautiful swan, but more importantly, he had become confident and happy. He had learned that it's not about where you start, but where you end up, and who you become along the way. As the years went by, the swan continued to live peacefully on the lake. He was no longer the sad, lonely duckling who had been teased and rejected. He had grown into a strong and graceful swan, full of confidence and wisdom. He often shared his story with others, hoping to inspire them to believe in themselves. The swan had learned that everyone has their own unique beauty and that true happiness comes from within. The swan had found his happiness, but he never forgot his past. He knew that the challenges he faced as a duckling had made him stronger. He was grateful for the lessons he had learned along the way, and he knew that his story could help others who felt lost or different. The swan had discovered that being true to yourself was the most important thing, and he hoped that everyone could find the same happiness he had. The story of the ugly duckling teaches us that everyone is unique and special in their own way. It reminds us that we shouldn't judge others by their appearance and that we should always be kind and understanding. The ugly duckling's transformation into a beautiful swan shows us that no matter how difficult things seem, there is always hope for a better future. Believe in yourself, and you too will find your own happiness.